In today's episode, I'll be making this awesome dock that is perfect for your Warhammer, D&D, or any other tabletop gaming experience. So to start, I'll just take this pack of balsa that I got from my local hobby store and kind of just dig through here until I find some pieces that'll work nicely for a dock. So I ended up with some of these larger posts and some of the timbers that just looked about right. Now the plankings for this, I'm going to actually be using just some popsicle sticks, so I'll trim off the edges and just make sure that they all kind of fit nicely. And then for the links, I decided to cut those at 3 inches so that we'd have a little bit of room to work with within the foam. So I'll just take my saw here and make sure that I cut those down straight and even, making sure to rotate them as I go so I don't get any breaks with this balsa wood. Next, I just glue all that together with some wood glue and just kind of hold those in place until they look like they're about right. I had to go through and mark each of these just kind of where I eyeballed it to make sure it looked nicely and let those dry. Now to actually get these cross beams, I just put some of the popsicle sticks across the top there after they're cut, just to kind of see where they'd fit nicely and overlap to the right length. Now to get the texture on these, all I did was run my hobby knife over there, and then just kind of dig in there to get some natural wood grain, letting the blade really just kind of flow as the wood takes it. Whittle down the edges a bit, just to add a little bit of wear and tear. And then once you've got that done, you've got some pretty nice looking beams. Now originally I did have some walnut stain I was going to try to do this dock with as a way to do the wood coloring, but it ended up being a lot darker than I wanted it to be and it almost just looked black, so I ended up just painting this. But stain is definitely something I'd experiment with more in the future and probably get a lighter tone next time. After I had all these planks textured, I just started gluing those in place, making sure I kind of kept the same spacing throughout there, just eyeballing as I went, and then test fitted before I glued all these in. I ended up with a pretty nice spacing and look that I really enjoyed. So after that, I had primed the dock. I just went ahead and traced where all these posts were going to be sticking into the foam, and then I could start cutting those out. So once I had all those posts traced, I knew where they were going to go. I could start cutting those out. So to do these edge ones was pretty simple. All I did was make those nice slow cuts to get a nice clean edge. And on these interior ones, I just made some longer passes to make sure that the clean cuts were right there along the post walls. And then once I covered this up with the different basing materials, I knew that there wouldn't be any issues with those cuts. So for this lake bed, I knew I wanted it to be pretty shallow leading up to the ground there, so I just took my Sharpie and began tracing just a nice shallow hill all the way up to the edge there. From there, I could take that over to the Proxxon table and start cutting that out. So the first thing I did from there was just cut that in half at the Proxxon table, and then I could take each of those pieces and start shaping them down, just to make sure I get a nice slope. This is sped up quite a bit. Definitely, if you're going to do this method, really take your time with it so you don't break that wire. Now once I had all these cut out, all I do is glue those back together with some wood glue to get a nice strong bond there. When I was gluing these, I did make sure that I held it in place there for a moment just to make sure it stuck nicely. And then after that had dried for just a moment, I wiped off that excess and test fitted it with the dock in place. Now once that's drying, I'll just take some of the burnt umber paint here and give a nice base coat to the dock. And then for the actual base of this foam, I'll take some of this plaster and some water and mix that together with a little bit of paint. And this is the first time using plaster, so I just experimented with this a bit till I got to a texture that's kind of mud-like. I ended up adding another layer over the top of this with another method, but this was a great way to seal that together and fill that gap and kind of just create a nice base layer to build off of. I think if I were to build it thicker, I could probably just use just this layer, maybe even add some sand or debris to it to get a bit of a natural look to it, but as far as a muddy base goes, this worked just fine too. You could certainly just flock on top of this and it'd be very compelling. And just make sure to get around those posts to incorporate the dock. Now for the dock, I did mix up the paint scheme just a little bit. This time I dry brushed with a gray to try to get a bit more of a weathered look, as I've seen recommended in the comments, and also seen a few projects of other people do this that turned out pretty nice. I didn't love it as much as I have done with some of my others, but I'll probably still experiment with this in the future to try to figure out a right balance for that. Now for this next layer of gravel, I just took some sand and some glue and a little bit of paint and mixed that together until I got a nice, really textured mud pretty much. It was a bit thick at this point, so I just added a little bit more glue and mixed that together until I had a good slurry. Now I did want to make the ground here feel a little bit more damp, maybe mossy, so I added a bit of grass green to it, just to add a little bit of life to the ground. From there I just kind of put that all over the base with a popsicle stick and scraped it around and pulled it just to get a nice even coat. And then from there I was able to take that popsicle stick and kind of scrape off the extra. As it had dried a little bit, that left a really nice texture of that sand below. and also kind of lighten it up a bit by scraping off a lot of this extra glue, make sure that wasn't necessary. So after that, I just took some small pebbles and spread those around for some extra texture, and then took a little bit of twine and just glued that in place. After I'd done the first one, I changed it up and just tucked in that first corner, then wrapped it around so that the only exposed rope would be facing out from the bottom there. There's definitely a lot of ways you could do this. I've seen people just soak that string in PVA glue and water mixed together and then wrap that around real tight and let it dry in place that way. But I found that the super glue was a very easy way to do that. Now for the grass, this was my first time using one of the static grass applicators, and it definitely made a big difference. Towards the top, I started with a light green and then worked my way to kind of a yellow towards the bottom, and then just took some of that fine flocking and kind of dusted that over the top, just to add a bit more texture and color variation to the grass. Then to finish off this, I just took some of my moss mixture with PVA glue and began spraying that all around the dock and on the ground, just where water might be pooling up, and especially along the inside of these beams and along the ground there. Now I got some of these barrels from Hobby Lobby as well. I just took that same burnt umber, and then I noticed that with this wood grain I was able to just brush up and down, and that made a really nice wood texture on there already. So to finish these off, I just took some of my metallic paint and painted those rims on there, and these looked really good down on the table when you're not looking at them very close right up. So to finish this off, all I did was take some black paint and clean up those edges, and we could call this project done. In the end, I really did have a lot of fun with this project. It was something I've been wanting to do for a while, and I think it came out pretty good. The rope was a lot of fun to play with, as well as the mossy grass and ground texture that's a little bit different from the stuff I've tried to make before. But this would be a great project to throw into any kind of tabletop gaming. Until next time, thank you guys so much for watching, and be sure to keep crafting.